Archaeologists in Britain say they've made an astonishing find. They believe they've uncovered the remains of long-lost royalty.
Richard III was a famous king of England, lost for centuries until his body was found in Leicester. But when scientists reran his genome in 2025, it revealed surprising details about his ancestry. Could this mean someone without the royal bloodline once ruled England? Stay tuned, because this discovery is about to change British history. The DNA work that identified the skeleton. When scientists lifted the fragile bones from the grave in Leicester, they knew they were touching a story that had waited for more than 500 years to be told. The wars, the battles, the politics, the rumors, everything about Richard III had been debated for centuries. But bones do not argue, genes do not take sides, and DNA, once unlocked, can shine a clear and steady light where history has remained dark for too long. The team that turned this mystery into a scientific breakthrough was led by geneticists at the University of Leicester. They worked with experts from many different countries, bringing together people who understood ancient DNA, medieval history, radiocarbon science, and complex statistical modeling. Their goal was simple but extremely difficult: to prove with strong scientific confidence whether the skeleton found beneath the parking lot truly belonged to the last Plantagenet king. The first challenge was extracting ancient DNA from bones that had been underground since the late 15th century. Time breaks DNA into tiny pieces, soil damages it, and the conditions of burial can destroy nearly everything. Still, the team managed to recover enough genetic material to begin building a clear picture. They focused first on mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down the mother's line almost unchanged. This type of DNA is especially useful in historical cases because it stays stable over many generations. The researchers compared the mitochondrial DNA from the skeleton to that of living people who had been traced, through careful genealogical research, back to Richard III's maternal line. The result was remarkable. One descendant showed an exact match, and another showed only a tiny single-letter difference, which is normal in families separated by many centuries. This strong maternal link became one of the key pieces of evidence. Then there was the Y chromosome, which passes from father to son. The team compared the skeleton's Y chromosome with that of living men who claimed descent from Richard III's paternal line. This time, the match did not appear. At first glance, this seemed confusing, but the scientists immediately understood what this meant. Over nearly 20 generations, it is very common for at least one break to happen in a male line because of a historical event where a child's biological father was not the man recorded in documents. This does not weaken the identification. Instead, it shows why genetic lines can drift away from written family trees across centuries. To settle the question once and for all, the researchers combined every piece of evidence they had. They used radiocarbon dating to confirm the time period. They studied the injuries on the bones, which matched written accounts of the wounds Richard received at the Battle of Bosworth Field. They confirmed the age of the man at death, the spinal features, and the burial location inside the demolished friary. Then they folded all of this together with the genetic data inside a formal scientific model known as a Bayesian analysis. This method allowed them to test the probability of identity using all the facts at once, not separately. The final conclusion was very clear. The remains belonged to Richard III beyond reasonable doubt. This conclusion was published in a major scientific journal and announced by the University of Leicester. And now that identity was proven, a new question rose. What deeper secrets could this DNA reveal about the way Richard looked, the lines he came from, and the puzzles hidden in his family tree? The code of appearance and the puzzle in the male line. With the skeleton confirmed as Richard III, scientists could now look more closely at the genetic clues that hinted at his appearance and ancestry. Even though DNA from centuries-old remains is fragile, it still carries enough signals to help build a picture of a person's physical traits. For a historical figure whose portraits were painted long after his death, this was incredibly important. The team examined specific genetic markers linked to hair and eye color. These markers do not give exact shades, but they offer strong probabilities. The results suggested that Richard likely had light hair in youth and lighter-colored eyes, a pattern that matched the earliest surviving portraits painted closest to his lifetime. These early portraits were considered the most reliable, and the DNA analysis supported their general accuracy. It was a rare moment where art and science agreed. While these findings about appearance fascinated the public, it was the Y chromosome story that created the deepest scientific curiosity. The mismatch between the skeleton's Y chromosome and those of modern men who believed they were descended from Richard's paternal line raised an important question about medieval family trees. Since the line from Edward III down to these present-day men spans nearly 20 generations, even one undocumented break in the line would cause the Y chromosome to change. Such breaks are far more common than most people imagine. Over many centuries, records do not always reflect biological reality. Families shape their histories through marriage, survival, and political strategy. A single event, never recorded, never spoken of, could quietly redirect the male line. The mismatch did not cast doubt on Richard's identity. Instead, it reminded historians that written genealogies from the medieval world were never perfect maps of blood. The fact that the mitochondrial DNA matched so strongly gave the researchers a stable anchor, and the male line puzzle simply added a layer of human reality to the story of long dynasties. This discovery also taught a broader lesson. Y chromosome testing cannot be used on its to confirm or deny royal descent across many centuries. The further back the line stretches, the more likely it is for quiet breaks to occur. The work on appearance and lineage brought Richard III out of the shadow of legend and made him more real. His traits were no longer only painted guesses. His ancestry was no longer only a line drawn in faded ink. And as scientists pieced together these details, a bigger question formed, one that reached beyond genetics. What other hidden doors could this discovery unlock about his world, his time, and the mysteries that shaped his short and dramatic reign? A king's bones can tell his story, but to understand how the story began, we must return to where it all started: the man and the myths. Richard Plantagenet entered the world on the 2nd day of October in the year 1452, inside the strong stone walls of Fotheringhay Castle. He was the second surviving son of Richard, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville, two powerful figures standing near the heart of England's political struggles. From the moment he took his first breath, Richard was tied to a family whose name carried both glory and danger. England at that time was not a peaceful kingdom. The land was torn between two rival houses, York and Lancaster. These long conflicts would later be known as the Wars of the Roses. Richard grew up surrounded by whispers of battle, shifting alliances, and the heavy weight of family expectations. Even as a child, he likely saw how quickly fortunes could rise and fall for those in power. When Richard was still young, his father and older brother Edmund passed away in battle. The loss changed everything for the family. His eldest brother Edward rose to lead the House of York, and with strength and determination he claimed the throne as King Edward IV. Richard, still only a boy, found his life shaped by this sudden rise in status. He was given the title Duke of Gloucester and began a path that placed him close to the center of royal power. As he grew into adulthood, Richard proved himself loyal, brave, and skilled in warfare. He supported Edward IV through the twists of the conflict, helping him reclaim the throne after moments of crisis. Richard fought in key battles, took on important regional responsibilities, and earned a reputation for firmness and discipline. In the north of England, where he spent much of his time, he became known as a dependable leader who kept order in difficult areas. Richard's devotion to his brother, the king, shaped his identity. He served as a trusted commander during the wars and as a strong political figure during peace. He married Anne Neville, a woman from another powerful family, strengthening his position further. Though his life was not without challenge, he stood firmly within the Yorkist world that shaped him. Then, in the spring of 1483, everything changed again. King Edward IV passed away suddenly, leaving his 12-year-old son, Edward V, as heir. Because the new king was a child, Richard was named Lord Protector, responsible for guiding the kingdom until Edward came of age. At first, this seemed simple. Richard was respected, experienced, and deeply tied to the ruling family. But in the months that followed, political tensions rose quickly. Rival groups within the court fought for control of the young king. Suspicion grew, pressure mounted. Decisions made in haste soon reshaped the future of England. After a series of political moves, Richard was declared the rightful king, and on the 26th day of June 1483, he was crowned Richard III. His reign was short, lasting just over 2 years. It ended in blood on the field of Bosworth on the 22nd day of August in the year 1485. Richard passed away fighting, and with his fall, the Tudor dynasty rose. He was the last English king from the Plantagenet line, closing a long chapter of family rule that had lasted for more than 3 centuries. Richard's early life was full of loyalty, conflict, strength, and duty. Yet the world remembers him in very different ways. Some call him a brave and capable leader. Others call him dangerous and cold. How could one man inspire such opposite views? And how did this popular prince become one of history's most criticized kings, shaped by storytellers who lived long after he was gone? The battle for a king's memory. When Richard III fell at Bosworth, he did not simply lose a crown. He lost control over the story of his life. The rulers who came after him, the Tudor kings, had every reason to paint him in the darkest colors. Their power rested on the claim that Richard was unfit to rule, and that their victory brought justice and stability. So, immediately after 1485, a wave of negative descriptions appeared. Chroniclers wrote of a king who was cruel, cunning, and marked by deformity. These accounts would shape his reputation for centuries. Decades later, in the late 16th century, one of the most influential storytellers in history added his voice. A playwright named William Shakespeare created a drama that turned Richard into a symbol of villainy. On stage, this Richard was twisted in body and twisted in spirit, a scheming ruler driven by ambition and malice. The image was powerful, memorable, and frightening. Audiences accepted it because it fit neatly with the Tudor view of the past. But Shakespeare was not a historian. He lived long after Richard's death, and his work belonged to the world of theater, not the world of evidence. The Tudor writers who came before him had political motives. Their words helped secure the strength of a new dynasty. As a result, for many generations, the real Richard III was hidden beneath layers of exaggeration and myth. In the 20th century, historians began to peel back those layers. They examined documents written during Richard's lifetime, compared them with Tudor accounts, and looked closely at motives behind the stories. Many scholars realized that the darkest descriptions did not come from people who knew Richard personally. Instead, they came from those who had reasons to please the new rulers or to shape the past in a way that supported Tudor ideas of order. This opened a major debate. Some argued that Richard had been unfairly judged. Others believed that even if some stories were exaggerated, his actions during 1483 and 1484 raised difficult questions. The truth lay somewhere between praise and condemnation, but without physical evidence, the discussion remained locked in words. Then came a moment that changed everything. In the year 2012, Richard's skeleton was discovered beneath a car park in Leicester. Suddenly, historians did not need to rely only on the words of Tudor writers or Shakespearean drama. They had the king's actual remains. They could study his bones, examine his injuries, and gather scientific data that did not depend on political agendas. The finding of his remains reopened old debates with new energy. It confirmed that he had scoliosis, a condition that affected his spine, but it did not support the extreme descriptions of a twisted body invented in later storytelling. It also gave insight into the violent nature of his final battle. The discovery of his remains did not settle every question, but it grounded the debate in something solid, something human. And now that words have shown their limits, a bigger puzzle appears. If written sources can twist a king's story, what can scientific evidence reveal that myths cannot? The search beneath the stones. For many years, the story of Richard of York's final resting place drifted between record and rumor. Chronicles said he was buried in the choir of Greyfriars, a friary in Leicester. Later centuries erased the building, raised new streets, and finally covered the ground with a quiet municipal car park. By the early 21st century, the friary's footprint was invisible. Yet clues in old maps and documents suggested the walls might still lie below the modern surface. It was only a matter of locating the exact spot. In September 2012, a team from the University of Leicester began a careful excavation. They were not expecting a full cemetery, only the traces of a lost religious house. Their plan was simple: open a few trenches at the most promising points, compare what they found with the friary's recorded layout, and work outward from there. The hope was that if they could identify the choir the heart of the church, they might finally locate the burial place described in the historical sources. The first trench ran across a section of the car park where old maps seemed to converge. The archaeologists expected foundations, broken tiles, and maybe a small scatter of medieval debris. What they did not expect was a human skeleton appearing almost immediately under the modern surface. The grave was shallow, narrow, and irregular, as if the burial had been carried out in haste. Yet the individual inside was an adult man, laid in a place once reserved for important figures. This combination alone captured the team's attention. Once the remains were gently uncovered, the archaeologists noticed that the grave lay exactly where the friary's choir was thought to be. This matched the documentary clues that spoke of a man of high status being buried quickly after battle. The skeleton's age also aligned with the recorded age of Richard of York at death. The bones suggested someone in his early 30s, consistent with the king who passed away on a summer morning at Bosworth. Even at first glance, the team could see signs of injuries. They kept all observations cautious and clinical, noting only that the wounds appeared to match trauma expected in battle. The idea that these remains might belong to the last Plantagenet king was still only a possibility, but every new detail pushed the likelihood higher. The hurried grave, the position in the choir, the male skeleton, the correct age range, and the battle injuries formed a pattern too strong to ignore. The whole excavation moved with quiet care. Each stone, each piece of soil, each bone fragment was documented. Nothing was assumed. The team knew that many stories had been told about Richard across many centuries. Some celebrated him, others condemned him. But beneath all legends, there was the simple truth that a man had lived, fought, fallen, and been buried. The aim of archaeology was not to prove any story right or wrong, but to listen to the physical evidence without letting old tales interfere. As the skeleton was lifted, the archaeologist could feel the atmosphere shift. This was more than a discovery. It was the opening of a door. For 500 years, no one had known exactly where the king lay. Now the possibility that he had been resting for centuries under tarmac and faded parking lines stirred curiosity far beyond academic circles. Yet the bones had more to say. The next steps would take the story from soil to laboratory tables, from digging tools to medical imaging, and from rough historical guesses to measurable facts. If the skeleton truly belonged to Richard of York, the details of his final battle, his physical condition, and even his daily life might be recovered. The bones gave more than a burial. They spoke. What did osteology reveal? What the skeleton revealed? Once the excavation was complete, the skeleton was studied through detailed osteological work. Specialists examined each bone, documenting age, build, and signs of life events. The first and most important question was whether the remains matched the known profile of the king who had passed away at Bosworth. The bones pointed to a man in his early 30s, aligning neatly with Richard of York's age at death. The structure was slender, and the height fell within the range described in early accounts. One of the most striking findings was the clear presence of scoliosis. The spine curved noticeably, creating an uneven rise between the shoulders in life. The condition did not prevent movement or activity, but it would have shaped his posture. This detail matched descriptions written during Richard's lifetime, long before any later storyteller exaggerated or reshaped his image. The osteologists could tell the curve developed during adolescence, not from injury, and it would have required the body to compensate in subtle ways. With strength and training, the man could still ride, fight, and command an army, but his silhouette would not have been perfectly straight. The team then turned to injuries. There were several sharp force wounds concentrated on the skull and upper body, consistent with blows taken in the rush of close combat. Some injuries were deep enough that they would have been fatal. Importantly, all of these matched what is known about the fierce, chaotic battle where Richard charged forward in a last attempt to break his enemy's line. The wounds showed no signs of healing, confirming they were sustained at the moment of death. The skeleton also carried marks that suggested the final moments had been violent and fast. These were not the injuries of a long struggle, but of sudden impact in a crowded battlefield. The bones gave no story of retreat. They suggested a man who remained at the front, surrounded and struck down in the heat of conflict. Every detail matched the accounts that described Richard fighting bravely until the final moment. To deepen the study, the team used CT scanning and three-dimensional reconstruction. These tools allowed researchers to view the bones in ways impossible with the naked eye. They could measure the angle of the spinal curve, examine tiny bone fragments, and recreate the direction of certain blows. Each scan added another layer of evidence that strengthened the match with the historical king. Osteology also confirmed the overall health of the individual. There were no signs of severe disease. The joints showed the expected wear for a man who lived an active life in the 15th century. The teeth held small clues of diet and childhood development. The bones did not preserve everything, but what they did reveal created a portrait of someone shaped by training, duty, and the demands of warfare. As the analyses continued, the evidence collected from the skeleton lined up step by step with the details recorded in chronicles from the late medieval world. A man of the right age, a slender frame, a spinal curve noted in contemporary descriptions, injuries that matched the manner of death at Bosworth, a burial in the choir of a friary tied to his story. Piece by piece, the picture grew clearer. The work did not try to settle old debates about his character. Instead, it focused on the physical truth. The bones confirmed many parts of the historical record and corrected others. They replaced speculation with measurable facts and helped return Richard of York to the world not as a legend, but as a person whose life left real marks in stone, soil, and bone. The skeleton had given nearly everything it could through osteology. Now only one great question remained. Could science close the final gap and confirm identity beyond doubt? With identity accepted, how did Britain decide what to do with the remains? A king laid to rest again. When the identity of the skeleton was confirmed through scientific research, a new and delicate question rose to the surface. Where should Richard of York finally rest? He had been buried once in the late 15th century, placed quickly into the choir of Greyfriars after falling at Bosworth, but centuries of destruction had erased the friary, and the king had remained hidden under modern concrete. Once he was found, it became clear that the decision about his new resting place had to be handled with care, patience, and full respect for history. After the academic findings were published, a national discussion unfolded. Scholars, local leaders, and the public all weighed in. Two places stood at the center of the debate: the city of Leicester, where his body had been buried in the past, and the city of York, where his family roots and northern identity held deep meaning. Each side had sincere reasons, touching both heritage and emotion. Leicester held the ground where the king's bones had rested for more than 5 centuries. York represented his family's heartland and the loyalties he carried during his lifetime. It was a conversation shaped not by rivalry alone, but by the desire to honor a historical figure fairly. Legal processes soon followed. The remains had been recovered through a licensed archaeological excavation, which meant the law required a clear plan for reburial. Discussions with church authorities and government departments shaped the path forward. After careful review, Leicester Cathedral was chosen as the place where Richard would be reinterred. It stood near the site of Greyfriars, symbolizing continuity between the past and the present. The choice recognized both the archaeological context and the cathedral's readiness to host a burial that would attract national and international attention. The preparation for reburial took time. The process lasted from 2013 to 2015, and every stage carried layers of meaning. The cathedral worked closely with historians, clergy, legal advisors, and representatives of families connected by bloodline. Among these was Michael Ibsen, a matrilineal descendant whose mitochondrial DNA had helped confirm the identity of the skeleton. He played a special role in the reinterment by crafting the coffin from oak, a material that gave the burial a sense of dignity and quiet strength. His involvement added a personal element that linked the present not only to the king, but also to the generations of family who had carried that shared lineage. Outreach was another important part of the process. Communities in Leicester and York were invited to share their views. Public exhibitions explained the scientific findings, the archaeology, and the historical background. School groups, local historians, heritage societies, and curious visitors from across the country came to understand more about the man beneath the myth. The reburial became more than a ceremony. It became a national moment of reflection on identity, memory, and the ways a medieval king could still shape conversations in the modern world. When March 2015 arrived, the reinterment unfolded with respectful ceremony. The coffin was carried into Leicester Cathedral, where services were held to mark the long journey from the Battle of Bosworth to the new tomb. Clergy led the rites with solemn care. The cathedral's interior is filled with people representing scholarship, faith, family connections, and the wider public. Outside, crowds gathered to witness the conclusion of a story that had begun half a millennium earlier. The event drew attention from across the world. Newspapers, television crews, and online audiences followed the reburial. Some people focused on the scientific achievement, others on the historical value, and many on the emotional significance of returning a lost king to a proper resting place. The debate between Leicester and York continued in gentle tones, but now it was shaped less by competition and more by shared respect for the complexities of history. The physical and genetic evidence answered many questions, but some mysteries remain. Which ones still matter? What science cannot yet solve? The discovery of Richard of York's remains gave historians something rare: a firm foundation for understanding a man whose story had long been shaped by rivalry, politics, and propaganda. His identity was confirmed, his injuries were documented, and the broad facts of his death became clearer. But even with physical proof in hand, many deeper mysteries refused to settle. Some of the most persistent questions involve people whose lives were tightly connected to Richard, especially the two young princes whose disappearance has haunted English history for more than 5 centuries. The princes, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, vanished during the turbulent months after their father's death. Their fate is one of the most debated subjects in late medieval history. The discovery in Leicester could not answer what happened to them. Bones can reveal age, injury, and identity, but they cannot uncover motives or point to decisions made behind closed doors. The Leicester skeleton confirmed who Richard was, but it could not speak about what he did or did not do. The princes remain a puzzle without a clear conclusion. Historians rely on written records for these questions, yet those records are complicated. Some were created by Tudor writers who had reasons to cast Richard as a villain. Others were shaped by political pressures, personal loyalties, or gaps in memory. Even eyewitness accounts can be influenced by fear, confusion, or shifting alliances. When science steps into this landscape, it can anchor factual points, but it cannot rewrite the past where the documents fall silent. Another area of discussion concerns the political world that surrounded Richard. His rise to the throne, the swift changes in power, and the battles that followed all leave room for interpretation. Science can reveal how he passed away, but it cannot interpret the motives of nobles who supported or opposed him. It cannot explain why certain alliances formed, or why rumors spread so quickly in the tense months after Edward IV's death. Politics leaves traces in letters, laws, and chronicles, but many private thoughts were never written down. Genealogical questions also remain open. The DNA research revealed the break in the male line between Richard's Y chromosome and that of modern claimants descended from Edward III. This finding raised new discussions about the accuracy of medieval pedigrees. False paternity events are known to occur in long family lines, but the exact moment when this break happened is still unknown. Without additional remains from the intervening generations, the question will likely remain unresolved. Science can show the break exists, but not where it occurred or what circumstances surrounded it. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.